Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Patrick Dunn, and I'm a project and partnership manager at the Ufi VocTech Trust. I've got a particular interest in the criminal justice sector based on a number of really quite diverse projects that we've been involved in, and you'll be hearing from quite a few of them later in this session. Now, if you don't know about us, about the Ufi VocTech Trust, we're a grant funding body. We're a trust focused on delivering an increase in the scale of vocational learning. Our aim is to use our funding to catalyse change across the UK so that significant scale can be achieved in digital vocational learning for adults. We're involved in a very, very large number of projects, great and small, in a very broad number of sectors, and using really the widest possible range of technologies you can think of. We're also increasingly involved in investments in organisations that can support our strategy. If you'd like to know more about our work in the criminal justice sector, do click on the link at the bottom of the screen. There's going to be all sorts of resources in there. So in this session, which I'm hoping will be fairly spontaneous and interactive, we're going to talk about a series of questions and issues that have faced some of our projects. I hope this is going to be intriguing and interesting and helpful to you. And the questions will be, I might add some more questions, but the questions will be things like, how can we find out what learners need in the criminal justice sector? And how can technology help us do this? How does technology help us target solutions at individuals so they get what they need? And then having made sure that we target the right learning experiences and content at prisoners, at people, how can technology help us to, how can it make sure that they actually get it? You know, how do we provide access wherever they are? Because it's a complex sector. And then what can we do to use technology to increase the quality of engagement and enjoyment? So let's just introduce our contributors. I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves briefly, please, everyone, and just say a little bit about the projects that they've been involved in. So, Barbara, would you like to go first and tell us who you are and what you are involved in?
Okay, thanks, Patrick. So I'm Barbara McDonough. I'm a consultant working in prison education. I've worked in the sector for the last 30 years. And on this project, I'm working with Inside Connections, which is a community interest company based in Liverpool, who help ex-offenders into employment and also work in prisons to provide training to prisoners to help them to become more employable. Our project focuses around health and safety in construction, and we are aiming to prepare some interactive learning materials that will enable our learners to pass the health and safety environment test and obtain their CSCS card whilst they're still in prison. And that's something that's currently not possible, but we're hoping to get around a number of technological issues to make that a real priority, because it does help people to access employment on construction sites when they're released.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Barbara. So James, tell us about yourself and Socrates and your involvement with UFI.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. So yeah, my name is James Levy, Business Development Director for Socrates Software, and we specialise in providing lockdown tablets and our Socrates 360 platform for use in secure facilities, primarily for prisoners, but also for prison staff in the UK, across Australia and North America. I'm actually joining you today from Austin, Texas, from our office in the US. Our UFI VocTech project is called Way to Work, and in a nutshell, it allows employers and prisoners to match skills for job roles and for prisoners to be able to create a path to gaining any required qualifications or certificates to enable them to enter a specific industry sector.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Isn't it great that we can connect all over the place? We just never know, would we? It must be a very different time from where you are as well. Ruth Walker, can you just tell us about NIACRO and your involvement with UFI?
Thanks, Patrick. So I am the Business Development Manager with a charity based in Northern Ireland called MyAcro. We are a charity that works across the criminal justice system, both in prisons and in community settings, supporting about 6,000 people a year. We have employability programs in Northern Ireland's 3 main prison sites, and our UFI project, which started back in 2020 and is sort of on now phase 2 of its development, is similar to Barbara's. It's sort of trying to look at the same issue, which is getting people that want construction employment upon release to get the qualifications, but also some virtual experience. So one of the prisons that we work with in Northern Ireland, a high security prison where work placements really aren't possible, we work to develop a virtual reality based training tool that will assess people on their level 1 in a construction health and safety environment. So we've been having a brilliant journey with Patrick over the last 2 years and developing the first element of our VR assessment tool, and are working with UFI once again to take it on to sort of the next stage of getting the full accreditation on that level 1 qualification.
Great, thank you very much. Dan, tell us about, we've been involved with Meganexus for quite a few years now. Tell us about what you're up to with us in our project, and a little bit more about Meganexus as well.
Thanks, Patrick. Dan Brown, Head of Business Development at Meganexus. We've been working for many years, as Patrick's alluded to, on the virtual campus, supporting people in prison to upskill and leave prison to lead more successful lives. And we've been working on a UFI project to enable that to be in cell on a variety of different devices in different ways. And that project is coming to a culmination, which I think is actually finally taken a while, got to a significant level of success in terms of rolling out in different ways across most of the prisons in the UK.
Thank you very much, Dan. And Ronnie, you've just started a project with us, although I think you know us quite well. About yourself and what First Step is up to.
Okay, basically, I'm Ronnie Wilson, Chief Executive of First Step Trust, a registered charity that's been about for about 30 years. We've spent a long time working with people furthest away from the labour market, so people with mental health problems, people with learning disabilities, folk that's physically, mentally or emotionally abused, and people that's just no functioning in a way that society can cope with. And then the kind of issues that we're dealing with are people with low levels of self-esteem, low levels of literacy and numeracy, and people who just don't manage to learn in a traditional way. So what we've struggled with is, how do you support that group to actually learn how to do things? And we've got a wee bit of a theory that's based on Professor Hawkins, that, you know, Professor Hawkins was a genius, but if you took his books off him, he wouldn't be able to communicate that. And our theory and strategy is that we're not saying everybody's a genius, but what we are saying is that people, the last bastion of discrimination is this thing, having to read and write to communicate your capacity. So we're using virtual reality and other technologies to create a range of virtual workplaces that people in prisons, people in the community can actually go. What we've done with Ufi VocTech has been through the discovery and proof of concept stage, and we've now got a marketable product that we're developing with the support of the Institute of the Motor Industry and Health Resort Centres, round about fitting and replacing a tyre and balancing the wheel. We're also developing other VR projects that the idea is we'll take into prison and folk can do. 90% of the people we've worked with just love it, because it gives folk a chance to be and do, rather than sit in a classroom and everybody watching them. And I think a lot of the people here today will actually sort of recognise that approach, that dignity is a very, very big issue.
Yeah. Great, thanks very much, Ronnie. You know, my reflection already is what an extraordinarily diverse range of projects we're involved in. You know, if we stopped right there, I think I would have already learned quite a bit. Okay, but let's get on to the issues and the questions. So the first intriguing one is, how can we actually find out, how can we use technology, and how can we have technology-based solutions? How can we find out what learners actually need in this sector? But Barbara, what do you think? What's your experience of working out what learners actually need, and can technology help in that?
I think there's two strands really to this, Patrick. We need to understand the wider needs of the prison population, and then we need to understand the needs of each individual prisoner that we deal with. So when thinking about the wider needs of the prison population, it's great to have a range of data that we can use from each cohort as we work with them to be able to predict what we need to secure in terms of the provision that we put in place. One of the key things we do know is that everything we do in prison education is around employment, and it's how we help people to become more employable. For some prisoners, that's about improving their English and maths. For some, it's about personal development. For others, it can be about helping to improve their self-esteem and confidence. And for a wide number, it's about helping them to improve their technical skills. So looking at vocational training and looking at where there's skill shortages, and we can support prisoners to get the right skills to gain that employment that we know makes a significant difference. So when working with individuals, it's about how we can use technology to help assess their needs. And also, so thinking about the assessment for English and maths, thinking about the huge amount of neurodiversity that's present in the prison population. So assessing need, but then also how we address needs using that technology, because where we have, as Ronnie has just described, a huge amount of neurodiversity, prisoners learn in different ways. They've also quite often had quite a negative experience from the school. Their school experience has been it's sometimes quite traumatic, but because of that neurodiversity, they might not have been engaged well in the school system, and many of them have truanted or been excluded. So putting somebody with that sort of past experience into a traditional classroom setting can be very negative. And that's where technology can make a huge amount of difference. So we can use it to identify need, but then also start to address needs in a different way, so that it's more engaging and that prisoners are able to work at their own pace and move through the system and get the very best learning experience possible.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we may well come back to, well, we are going to come back to engagement later on, because I know that's really one of the focuses of your project with us. So Dan, Meganexus is in, now just correct me here, is every prison in England, or it's not every prison in the UK? Just correct me.
England and Wales.
England and Wales. Okay, so you've obviously got a lot of experience of trying to figure out what on earth what prisoners need to learn. How does technology help us with that?
Well, I'd like to counter this, because it can help by understanding and using AI to predict and anticipate the needs of people. It can also deter and hinder and damage by asking the same things over and over and over again. So frequently there are systems that are created that ask the person the same things for the 20th occasion and doesn't then share the data with other systems. This is a danger. So one of the things that we've got to think about with technology is how to ensure that the data is securely and reliably shared and distributed and used again and again to stop those same senseless asking of the same things, which is so damaging to both the service users and the staff. And I think it's getting that balance right with some predictive techniques that provide the right information, the right resources and support with the minimum of repetitive asking.
Oh my goodness, that's such an important point, isn't it? Because a kind of characteristic of this sector is discontinuity, isn't it? Disconnection. And so this point that an individual might have their needs so-called diagnosed, and then again, and never actually have them addressed is a really big deal, isn't it? And actually, what I'm going to do, Ronnie, just before I come to you, I want to talk about a project that we funded, but unfortunately they couldn't come today because, Dan, it completely plays into what you just said. They're called Fluence, and what they did was they produced a bit of machine learning, a bit of AI, that basically takes very, very messy, diverse, informal inputs and starts on the process of needs diagnosis. It attempts to, fairly successfully, kind of replaces the human diagnostic process, it emulates that diagnostic process, and attempts to therefore release the individual, the trainer, to actually go and do the main job, which is teach. It's been fairly successful in doing that. Basically what it does is it both allows for a pre-assessment by taking in all this kind of messy, diverse data, including handwritten information, and it also allows for post-assessment. In other words, when a prisoner's coming to the end of their term or the end of their training, we can say, again, taking all this messy input, this is what they've learned, this is how they've changed. Now, in terms of its implementation, it's at a fairly early stage, but it really plays in very much to what Dan was saying about not disrupting and intervening in a kind of intrusive way, and yet still coming up with a kind of diagnostic and assessment system, which I think is interesting. And of course, that's going to be the kind of thing we see in all aspects of our lives in the near future. Ronnie, how about you? How on earth do we use technology to help us figure out what prisoners need?
I think technology, I mean, if you can avoid the internet, which the prison definitely do not like internet, yes, and understandably. I think for me, it's you go in there and you recognise that there's a secure environment. The rules are there for a good reason. It's to protect everybody that's in the prison. And I think when you come to technology, then you have to have that mindset when you're designing technology. This is about making something that's, as far as possible, self-contained. It meets GDPR, and it's something that actually enables users, end users, whatever you want to call them, residents, prisoners, whatever. My experience is that the minute people put on a VR headset, it really is immersive. They are not in prison. And that's a 99.9% feedback success that we have achieved with the virtual reality. I think virtual reality allows people not to be looked at. And for the first time in a long, long time in people's lives, they're not in a cell, they're not in that culture where you're macho or you're whatever you are. You're safe. You're actually free to do what you can possibly do. I think technology allows us to respect people's brilliance. And I use that word deliberately because, you know, you might think folk are criminals and, you know, sub-society, but actually they're very clever people. And, you know, a lot of them just have no the opportunity to actually develop their skills. Technology, things like assistive technology helps people do it. If you've got people with different languages, you know, there's easy accessible technology to make things accessible. It's got to be something on the part of the provider, and that's us, that willingly wants to enable people to learn in a very non-judgmental way. It doesn't matter to me whether people can read and write. We've got people who can't read and write, and within 2 45-minute sessions, they've been able to take a wheel off a, take a tire off a wheel, replace it, and put a new one on and balance a wheel in the exact same equipment that we do in real life. We've had people in secure units that have done that 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and once they've been allowed to get out of that secure unit, they've actually came and done the tire in real life within about half an hour's supervision. So they'll do it supervised with a bit of discussion, and that embedded learning. And I think technology has the added advantage of embedding. You know, you create memory muscle in a very, very powerful way. And I think some of the stuff that's happening, I believe that there's room for collaboration with all the technologies that we're using to find a way of actually saying, well, this is your direction, but I think this will work. You know, I want a virtual construction site. I want a virtual kitchen. I want a whole load of virtual workplaces so that people can have a go and see how they go. And then you build that into qualifications outside. And the danger is duplication. Technology tends to push us to duplicate. You know, there's an awful lot of folk doing literacy and numeracy stuff. And actually, I think some folk are better at it than others. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Patrick?
Yeah, very much so. And we're going to come back later to the whole issue of immersion and engagement, because I know the NIACRO project is very much, it's kind of in the same domain as yours, the same area as yours. James, I think you want to chip in here. What's your interest in this?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, you know, it's critical talking to prisoners or residents, as we call them in the sector. And it was highlighted this morning. I was talking to a colleague of mine who'd been in a prison this morning, talking to a gentleman who'd been inside for 18 years, still has another year or two to go on his sentence, you know, hasn't dealt with any sort of technology that we have nowadays that we're all used to, has absolutely no idea. So he doesn't actually know what his needs are, because he doesn't know what, absolutely no idea. It's a completely new world for him. So my colleague sat there with a tablet this morning, and, you know, the feedback that he's got from that gentleman now helps us, you know, continue to develop the accessibility for those that really don't have any technology skills or very low level technology skills.
And do you know, that's such an issue. I think it was a report I read from the Centre for Social Justice, and some of the statistics in there are absolutely extraordinary. There's quite a number. You bear in mind quite how many residence inmates there are. There's quite a proportion who have never touched a digital device. They've never actually picked one up. Yeah. So this idea that you can stroll out to the outside world and get a job, it's pretty tricky, isn't it?
100%. Yeah.
If you've never actually touched a smartphone and a tablet, if you don't, I mean, you'll probably know what a laptop is, but a smartphone will be just like an alien device to you. So it's such an issue, and we'll come back to this a little bit later. Ronnie, do you want to chip in there?
Yeah, I just want to say again, I was in a prison this morning, and very often you hear people talking about being frightened to get out. So you're talking about people who've got long-term 10, 15, 20-year sentences, and they're actually scared of getting out because they know that the world has moved beyond them. We assume because they watch television and day stuff that they're up to date, but actually they're no. They're frightened of going on a bus. They don't know how to open a bank account. They don't know how to manage money. They don't know where to shop, how to shop. And on top of that, they've got that pressure that their offence still hangs over their shoulders. So I think it's really important that we don't underestimate how damaged and institutionalized people are. Yeah. You know what I mean? And again, that's part of how we need to address.
That's interesting. And I think we are going to keep touching on this issue of immersion. So without overplaying our hand here, presumably we're then not just talking about immersing prisoners in how to fix a tire. We might be immersing them in all sorts of other, shall we say, real world experiences in order to rehearse them, in order to then have practice to emerge into this strange world that some of them are then presented with. Is that right? Does that make sense? So it's not just about fixing, car parts or tires. It could be all sorts of things.
It's a bit of a pun, but it's almost about fixing people, because I look at this and I think if we can generate an ambition for people or reflame an ambition to work, then psychologists, psychiatrists have an opportunity to work with that person through that kind of environment, saying, well, you're going into a building site, or you're going into a garage, you're going to meet strange people, you're in there, how do you deal with that? What's going through your mind? What you're worried about? And you might have somebody who's been violent because they're paranoid and just feel that they're looked at all the time, and that's what's led to the bad history. Yeah. And the deal would be that if you don't deal with that paranoia, that person's going to come out and nothing's changed.
Yeah.
And actually it's exacerbated because the world's too fast a pace. But again, this morning, one of the guys said to me that, an older guy tried technology, and it said that it gave him some idea of how fast the world is outside. So I just think, I love technology. Ironically, I'm really technophobic and I'm scared, but I do love technology for learning. I think this is the future. We don't use an abacus any longer. We don't even use a calculator. We use a mobile phone. And why are we sitting folk in front of presentations and stuff like that when you can actually take them on a journey that gives them control of their own learning? Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Ruth, I'm sorry we've kept you waiting for so long, because of course you can absolutely build on what Ronnie's just been saying, in that you are immersing people in experiences. So how did you actually work out that this would be an attractive and engaging thing for former prisoners to be involved in? How did that occur to you?
Well, I suppose it occurred to us, Patrick, initially when we had this recognition that upwards of 30% of the people that we have supported over the years that have moved into employment in construction. But once they're released from prison and get into that job, do they stay in them long term? And the answer was often they didn't. So that initial thought was, well, how do we prepare people not only to get into employment, but to get into employment in such a way that they're more likely to sustain it long term? And we just, I suppose, the whole issue of work experience was the thing that we struggled with in NIACRO for a long time. And a lot of our work is in HMP Maghaberry, which is a Category A prison. And we were putting an awful lot of staff resource into, sorry, I'm being distracted because I have a cat just on that's trying to get into the picture here. We had a lot of resource getting using our staff to support people into day placements, and really it was becoming sort of almost farcical, the disproportionate amount of our time and effort and resource that was doing lifting people from the gate in the morning, taking them to a placement, bringing them home again in the evening, etc., etc. But we thought, how do we enable people to get that much needed experience so that when they are released, they're more likely to sustain work long term? And it was really that, Patrick, that led us down the VR route. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have some way in which we could help people to build their experience even without leaving the prison environment? And that's really what took us down the VR route. And then once we started thinking about the VR route and sort of helping people to be immersed in a virtual construction site, well, if they're going to do that, it might as well be a useful experience for them. So they might as well, whilst they're there on the virtual site, gain a qualification alongside that. So that's when we started to put the assessment for the level 1 within the application. I should also say that we've worked really closely with the Construction and Industry Training Board in Northern Ireland. They have been our partner, and they have walked with us through the journey and ensuring that the VR environment that we're building is fit for purpose in terms of what construction employers will be looking for. And CITB have also been working right across Northern Ireland on other ways in which people in prison can access different types of experiences. And there's simulators, big simulators that can simulate driving a forklift truck and a dumper truck and all sorts of hydraulic lifts, etc. And I know that there's a prison in Dublin now that has gone to the lengths of purchasing one of these big simulators, and that would be the next step that we're thinking about with along with CITB in Northern Ireland. So it doesn't just stop at VR. There's simulators and other experiences out there that we're starting to look into.
It's really interesting, this, isn't it? We keep coming back to this issue of immersion, don't we? Of taking people into a new world in order to allow them to rehearse, practice, to feel something different. And actually, it's interesting you mentioned CITB Northern Ireland, because we've got another project relatively started up, and that's using Ruth, correct me if I'm wrong, that's more augmented reality. But the really interesting thing about that is it's not functional skills, it's soft skills. So it's negotiation, problem solving. It's really intriguing because there's not a lot of VR around and AR around that uses the technology to cultivate soft skills, complex interpersonal skills. So I'm very intrigued by that one. There's quite a lot going on in Northern Ireland, isn't there, Ruth? It's really, really exciting.
Yeah, and certainly the other way in which we would sort of see maybe taking the next step in VR is some kind of mindfulness or other tools, because like Ronnie has already said, just that sense of giving people the opportunity to, for half an hour of their day, to feel like I'm not constrained by these prison walls and by this cell and by where I am, and I can have a sort of almost an out of body experience, and how that can be so good for the mind. And so thinking about gym exercises, mindfulness techniques, other ways. The other thing that I suppose NIACRO has learned over the years is the real distinction for us between the folks that we support who are on short-term sentences, that we know are those folks that come in and out of prison through that revolving door, and for whom their lifestyles are chaotic, and they have all sorts of complex problems and barriers in their lives. Contrasted maybe slightly with the prisoners who are maybe more long-term sentences and maybe ironically have a more stable lifestyle. And we've been thinking more and more as an organisation about how we support people who are on those short-term sentences, and we've just developed what we're calling a life stories program at the minute. Now, this is not at the moment in any way technological, but helping people think about their life story, helping people who feel I've nothing to put on a CV. I can't even begin to write a CV because I've nothing to contribute. And taking a step back and thinking, well, what is your life story? What have you learned through your experiences that you've had? What are these types of characteristics and skills that you sort of applaud and would exclude in your own life? And we're helping people put what's called an MV together, which is sort of a precursor to a CV. So that's another thing that we're having. We've just had accredited to deliver to people whose lifestyles are so chaotic that we're not thinking just yet about engaging you in formal education or vocational training. But let's just take a moment to think about you as a person and what you can bring to society and to life.
Gosh, that's fantastic. And I just thought I'd mention as well that there's a really interesting video of a sample of your work from the Site IT project. On if viewers click on the URL at the bottom of the screen, they will see a couple of bits and pieces, bits of video of what you've been up to. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Patrick.
I just want to move on to this idea of both targeting and access. So how do we, having worked out what prisoners, what inmates need, how do we target them? How do we make sure they get individually what they actually need and want? James, do you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Patrick. So, and the first thing to bear in mind is that we're all working in prisons, not schools or hospitals. Security is at the forefront of everything that we do. Otherwise, you don't last very long with a project in a prison. So, that being said, with all those restrictions, and bear in mind that the UFI VocTech Socrates Way to Work platform helps link employers with prisoners, and vice versa. We're having to use lockdown Socrates tablets that inmates can access specific learning and training materials related to that real job that they're hoping to obtain upon release. So that includes accredited and non-accredited courses, soft skills, of course, as well, and then certificates are then stored on the user profile so they can be accessed on their own phone once they're back in the community. So we call that a digital backpack that they can download and access that material, their CV, any other information, even prescription information, that they can then access wherever they are in the community when they need it, while they're at a job interview, for example. But yeah, accessibility is a big problem. Lack of hardware within prisons, lack of broadband, lack of Wi-Fi. 99% of prisons around the world won't have any Wi-Fi connectivity or broadband for prisoners, and where they do have it in those facilities that are lucky enough, it's normally in a restricted area in one location, for example. That is changing. Across all 3 continents where we work, but it's a slow process.
Yeah, sure. Of course it is, and again, it's the diversity of systems and what what's available. And
just adding to that, Patrick, that's why we have to do as much as we can for offline access, so that they can take something back to their cells on the tablet and still carry on working interactively.
Absolutely. And Dan, this is absolutely up your street, isn't it? In that you are in pretty much every site. Oh, actually, we mentioned it before, didn't we? I'm intrigued to know how on earth you did it, and what you're doing in terms of making sure that this is very demanding. How can every prisoner get access? It's all very well having fantastic systems and interesting content, but how can they actually get to the stuff?
Well, there's so many issues, as you know, and we've got to start as James was saying with the devices, but also think about getting the right content onto the devices or into the effective, secure cloud, and then we've got to understand what the individual's needs and wants are, and then we've got to understand how to map those individual needs and wants onto the relevant content, and then direct that appropriate material to the right person at the right point to help them on their journey. And all of those bits and more are incredibly complicated when they're moving around from place to place inside prisons. And then, of course, we have to think about outside prisons. And strangely, which isn't quite intuitive, in the prisons, there is almost a duty of care. When people go out of the prisons, the support can often fall off a cliff, and people get less support, and all the good work that they've been doing, that they're halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, 99% of the way through, just can disintegrate. So we've got to think about that through the gate journey as well, and access out of prisons to the work that they've been doing to support them in carrying that on, and as Ronnie was saying, to get into employment and then lead better, more stable, more satisfying lives. So I think all of those bits have to be thought through as part of the user journey.
Yeah, the whole concept of user journey is critical, isn't it? In that, my understanding is that the virtual campus is, just correct me if I'm wrong, the whole virtual campus is in theory available throughout that journey and outside secure institutions. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And it's absolutely critical that we support the user as they go out and once they're outside, and then support the organizations that can provide traditional, typical support that's not necessarily criminogenic in terms of mental health, in terms of housing, in terms of employability, and enable those organizations to get access again, inversely, but the organizations to get access to those service users when they're outside and nobody knows who they are and what they are. So what we want to do is to support those organizations to reach into the prisons, to support before the service user leaves the prison, so that when they go out, they carry on that support with the organization that's external to the prison establishment.
Great, thank you. We've covered a lot here. I want to move on to engagement, although interestingly, we keep referring to it, which kind of strongly suggests to me that it's a really big issue. Barbara, I just want to come to you. Given that the conditions that prisoners are in and the challenges they face, and that they may well have, they almost certainly have had a poor experience of learning education, how can technology really help to provide solutions that appeal, that really fit them, that they can engage and enjoy?
I think obviously it's been touched upon right throughout this conversation that we can make learning so much more exciting and more engaging by the use of technology. So that immersive experience with VR, or the simulators, which I've seen working really well to give people a real experience that is impossible to provide in the prison setting for, so many reasons we've already alluded to. I think what it can also do is enable prisoners to learn in their own preferred style at their own pace. It means that we can make a very finite resource spread as widely as possible, because if you think what we're trying to do within a prison education setting is to replicate a college offering and to respond in some cases to a prison population of 1,400 plus prisoners. So how do you do that, and how do you cater for individual needs and respond to the breadth of need when you've only got that finite resource? And I think technology can make that resource go so much further. So you can offer an individual learning experience at a whole range of levels, because we know the prison population is generally below level 2 in terms of their English and maths levels. But what happens to those higher level learners that can be sometimes excluded from from education because there's nothing specifically to meet their needs? And I think James has talked about this. It's how we then engage learners with technology and enable them to maybe learn at a distance. And we have some really good examples that came out of the COVID situation where prisoners, it was one good thing that did come out of COVID, where prisoners were using learning materials on, at a distance. We're able to engage with technology. Wouldn't it be great to be able to harness that learning and use that to have like a flipped classroom model or a blended learning approach? So you could actually increase the number of learners that could access education and learning and skills by having an approach where some of it is via technology and some of it is face-to-face. Because there's benefits, as Dan pointed out earlier, there's benefits to all types of learning. And that then enables you to be ticking the boxes for all learners in terms of their learning preferences. But I think to be able to do a lot of background work individually and then come together in the classroom to work collaboratively is a really rich and a good way to spread that resource and give learners a much better learning experience.
Yeah, and again, at UFI, I did mention that we deal with all sorts of technologies and all sorts of sectors, and more we are moving to this point where we say technology actually replaces nothing. Technology works with people, doesn't it? Absolutely. And 10, 15 years ago, we were all talking about, let's get rid of the people. And now what we're saying is, let's merge what's best with technology with what people do best. James, any thoughts on this? The whole issue of engagement and really bringing people into a subject or an experience that means something to them.
Yeah, we found that with the tablets, we get a lot better engagement and results really, and outcomes from where we can put not just education and learning on a tablet, but where we can put entertainment, and that can be various, games, movies, and things like that. Again, it can be related to the IEP level as well, incentives and earned privileges to some degree. But really important, we find, is things like family communications. So if you've got that device being used to communicate with your family as well, it just becomes, whether it's phone calls, video calls, pictures, even video messages from family, it becomes a cherished device that you're not just using to get a certificate or a degree or whatever, or to something that you're made to use. It becomes a lot more personal to you, so it gets looked after more and used more.
Yeah, isn't it great? If we're talking about the prison sector and technology, and words like cherished come out, or Ronnie, you were saying earlier on, brilliance. This is about things that these are extreme, powerful things, which is what our sector, our audience really needs. Ruth, your project really is all about engagement, isn't it? Now, you've talked a fair bit already about it. How would you really sum up about the importance of engagement, the importance of really pulling, in your case, former inmates into their experiences? Anything else you'd add?
I mean, I think the thing I would add more than anything else is what Patrick, what you've already said, that the personal engagement with people and finding ways to motivate people to understand what their needs are and to encourage them to the piece that's being offered. And so some of our staff that are really highly skilled in working in the prisons in Northern Ireland, I mean, they are going to, well, certainly pre-COVID anyway, going to people's cells, literally finding their shoes, walking them out the cell door to the education centre, or learning and skills as it's called. And it takes that much, it takes that slightly almost bolshy approach with people, just to say, come on, there must be something on offer here that would attract your attention or spark your interest. And so our staff have worked really hard over the last number of years, number one, in doing that legwork with people and really encouraging people to the piece, and not just accepting, oh, I don't think that's for me, I don't think I'll come to that today, thank you very much. Literally walking them across, saying, what can we do for you that will engage you? And particularly, like I know I said, but I come back to those folks on short sentences who are in and out of prison on a regular basis, and who might feel, well, I've done all the things that I can do on a short-term basis, but finding new offerings for them, and that's also partly what our virtual reality was about, finding new offerings for those people for whom learning is just something that they don't think will ever be for them.
Okay, I think it's probably just about time to wrap up. Now, forgive me, I'm going to ask you to do something that is completely unprepared. What a fascinating session. We've gone all over the place, haven't we? We've talked about access and interest and targeting and engagement and all sorts of things. I'm going to challenge you to try and come up with one important word. One, you're not allowed to say any more than one word that has most interested you over the last 30 or 40 minutes. And actually, we've gone on quite a bit longer than we planned. One word, all right? Just think about it I'm only going to give you 5 seconds. Ronnie, what's your one word? Or you need to switch yourself on.
Control.
Oh, control. How interesting. James?
Accessibility.
That's all you're allowed to say. Dan?
I can't remember the word. Ronnie's word of sort of perfecting. What was it, Ronnie? It was
control.
No. It was perfecting. It was of the apogee of achievement. Brilliance. That was it.
Thank you. And Dan, I knew you couldn't do it in a word. Barbara, your one word.
I'm a Scouser, Patrick. I don't do anything in one word. I'd say fun.
Fun. Ruth?
Visualized.
Oh, fantastic. Wonderful. Great. Okay. Many thanks.
Before you finish it, can I just say, we've talked a lot about prisoners. But some of the equation is getting the prison to understand how cost effective things like virtual reality. We can bring a factory in there. People can handle weapons and nobody gets hurt. And it's a powerful argument to get prisons. Maybe the Home Secretary should have a shot at my virtual program alongside the virtual construction site to get her interested.
It would be intriguing if they could actually put a tyre on. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for an absolutely fascinating conversation. I'm not going to try and summarize it because you've all covered it extremely well. I would just thank you so much for your time, and I really hope the audience has enjoyed what we've talked about and has learned something and has been rather intrigued about what we at the UFI VocTech Trust is up to. As I would say, I'll point you again towards the URL at the bottom of the screen. There'll be all sorts of resources in there, yeah, I would encourage you to have a look at them. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick.